you can see that actually behind this there is a secret passage leading to the Queen's private apartments.
Queen Elizabeth was not a sentimental woman in the obvious sense. She expressed what she felt through action, through decision, through the quiet, deliberate choices she made about who she trusted and what she gave them. Which is why what she did for Catherine is extraordinary. Among everything she owned, among the jewels and the centuries of accumulated royal history, she took one specific collection and removed it from everything else. She placed it somewhere separate, somewhere protected, somewhere that could only ever be opened by one person. And that person was Catherine. The Queen's most private act. There is a difference between leaving someone something and reserving something for them. That distinction sounds subtle. It is not subtle at all. It is the difference between a gesture and a decision, between an act that flows naturally from the ordinary processes of inheritance and one that requires deliberate, personal intervention to separate a specific thing from everything else and ensure it arrives exactly where you intend it to arrive. Ordinary royal inheritance is a vast and complicated process. The assets involved are staggering in their scope and their variety. Crown jewels held in trust for the nation, private collections accumulated over generations, properties, artworks, documents, and objects, whose legal status involves layers of ownership and obligation that teams of specialist lawyers spend years navigating. The machinery that governs what happens to royal assets when a monarch dies is not a simple mechanism.
If the Queen has only worn St. Edward's gold crown once, she is much more familiar with this, the diamond-encrusted Imperial State Crown.
It is an elaborate, carefully maintained system that has been refined over centuries to ensure that the right things go to the right places with the minimum of ambiguity or dispute. Queen Elizabeth understood that system better than anyone. She had lived inside it her entire adult life. She had watched it operate. She had seen where it worked well and where it created the kind of ambiguity that lawyers and family members and institutional officials spent years trying to resolve. She had a clearer picture of its strengths and its limitations than almost any other person alive during her reign, which is precisely why, when she wanted to ensure that something reached Catherine without ambiguity, without institutional interference, and without the possibility of it being redirected or reinterpreted by anyone else, she did not leave it to the system. She acted personally. The decision to reserve specific items exclusively for Catherine was not made in the final weeks or months of the Queen's life. It was not the kind of last-minute arrangement that sometimes gets made when someone senses the end approaching and wants to ensure that certain things are taken care of before it is too late. The people who had knowledge of what the Queen was doing have described a process that was years in the making, deliberate, considered, refined over time as the Queen's understanding of what she wanted to leave and who she wanted to leave it to became increasingly clear. That timeline matters enormously because it means this was not sentiment. It was not the emotionally charged decision-making of someone operating under the pressure of mortality. It was the considered long-term act of a woman in full command of her faculties who had thought carefully about what she owned, what it meant, and whose hands she trusted it to. Those are very different things. The physical arrangement of what the Queen reserved was characterized by a level of personal involvement that struck the small number of people who were aware of it as unusual, even by the standards of a woman known for her meticulous attention to detail. She did not simply instruct an advisor to set certain items aside. She was involved in the process herself, in the selection, in the decisions about what belonged together and what needed to be kept separate, in the arrangements that ensured the reserved collection would be protected and preserved in exactly the condition she intended. She treated it as her own project, not a royal project, not an institutional one, her own. That distinction tells you something important about how the Queen understood what she was doing. She was not acting as a monarch managing her estate. She was acting as a woman, making a personal choice about something that mattered to her, in a way that existed entirely outside the framework of her official role. The vault within the vault is how people close to the situation have described it. Not a separate physical structure, necessarily, in the architectural sense that the phrase might suggest, but a separate category, a clearly defined, deliberately maintained distinction between the items that belong to the ordinary processes of royal inheritance and the items that the Queen had removed from those processes entirely and placed in a different relationship with the future. The items in the reserve collection were not there by accident or default. Each one had been chosen. Each one had been considered in relation to the others. Each one had been placed in that collection because the Queen had a specific reason for wanting it there, and a specific understanding of why it belonged with Catherine rather than anywhere else. That level of intentionality is not common even among people of significant means making careful estate arrangements. Among monarchs whose assets are so vast and whose institutional obligations are so complex that truly personal gestures of this kind require deliberate effort to carve out from the surrounding machinery, it is rarer still. It speaks to the depth of what the Queen felt about the woman she was leaving it for, not in the sentimental language that the public version of royal relationships tends to reach for, not in the language of warmth and affection and the kind of visible emotional connection that makes for easy storytelling, but in the language that Elizabeth actually used when she wanted to communicate something important, the language of action, the language of decision, the language of a woman who knew that the most honest thing she could do for someone she trusted completely was to ensure that trust was made concrete and permanent in a form that could not be argued with or redirected or diminished by the passage of time and the complicated processes that follow every significant life. She could not be there when Catherine opened what she had left, but she had made sure that when that moment came, everything about it communicated exactly what she intended, completely, personally, without intermediary. The question now is what that collection actually contained, and what it reveals about the private relationship between two women that the public record has only ever partially captured.
There are a million objects in the royal collection, so there's always something new to find out about. 8,000 paintings.
What was inside? The contents of what Queen Elizabeth reserved for Catherine have not been formally catalogued for public consumption. That is not surprising. The most significant things the British monarchy holds have never been subject to the kind of transparent public inventory that people sometimes assume must exist somewhere. The institution's relationship with disclosure is selective by design. It shares what serves its purposes and protects everything else behind layers of legal privilege, institutional tradition, and the simple practical reality that nobody with the authority to demand a full accounting has ever successfully done so. But the outlines of what the Queen set aside have emerged, not through official channels, not through the kind of formal announcement that the palace would make if it wanted this information in the public domain, but through the careful, patient accumulation of detail that comes from people who were close enough to the process to know what was happening and who have, in the years since the Queen's death, found ways to communicate what they know to those paying close enough attention. What emerges from those accounts is a picture that is more personal than most people would have anticipated. The assumption, when people hear about a royal vault and a reserve collection, tends to run immediately toward jewels, toward the spectacular, historically significant pieces that define the public image of royal wealth. The tiaras and the necklaces and the bracelets whose stones carry histories stretching back centuries and whose financial value exists in a category that ordinary language struggles to adequately describe.
The mother of three wore a set of pearl and diamond earrings for the occasion that previously belonged to the late monarch.
There are jewels in what the Queen reserved for Catherine, but they are not the centerpiece of the collection. And understanding why requires understanding something about how Elizabeth thought about jewelry in a way that differed considerably from how the outside world tends to think about it. For the Queen, jewelry was never primarily about financial value or historical prestige. It was about meaning, about the stories attached to specific pieces, about the relationships and the moments and the private histories that certain objects carried within them in a way that no monetary assessment could capture. She wore specific pieces on specific occasions for reasons that were deeply considered and deeply personal. She used jewelry the way some people use language, as a vehicle for communicating things that she would not or could not say out loud. The pieces she reserved for Catherine were chosen on exactly that basis. They are not necessarily the most spectacular items in the royal collection. They are not the pieces that feature in the official portraits or the state occasion photographs that define the public image of royal jewelry. They are the pieces that carried specific personal significance to Elizabeth herself, pieces connected to moments in her own life that she wanted to pass forward to the woman she had chosen to carry the next chapter of that life. Several of the pieces are understood to have direct connections to the Queen's own early years as a royal wife. items she wore during the period when she was navigating the same transition that Catherine has been navigating, when she was learning what it meant to be not just a woman with a private life and private feelings, but the custodian of an institution that would always make demands that existed in tension with those private dimensions. She was leaving Catherine a thread, a connection backward through time to a woman who had walked a version of the same path and wanted the person walking it now to know that she understood what it required. But the jewels are only part of what was inside. The letters are the element that people who know about the collection describe with the most careful language, the most considered words, the most evident awareness that what they are touching on carries a significance that casual description cannot do justice to. Queen Elizabeth was not known as a prolific personal correspondent in the way that some historical monarchs have been. Her private written communications were guarded with extraordinary care. The number of genuinely personal letters she wrote, as opposed to the official correspondence that forms part of the public record, is understood to be relatively small, and the number of those personal letters that she chose to preserve and pass forward rather than have destroyed is smaller still. Several of them are in what she reserved for Catherine. The content of those letters has not been disclosed. It may never be disclosed. The privacy surrounding them is exactly what the Queen intended when she chose to place them in a reserved collection, rather than in any archive or official repository where they might eventually become accessible to researchers or the public. But the existence of personal letters from Elizabeth to Catherine, written over the years of their relationship, and preserved with the specific intention of being passed to her, tells its own story without requiring access to their contents. It says that there were things the Queen wanted Catherine to know that she had committed to paper, things considered important enough to write down and preserve, things whose communication could not be left to the ordinary processes of royal life or the institutional channels through which most royal business flows. Personal things. Things between two women rather than between a monarch and a future queen. The third category of what was inside is the hardest to describe precisely because it resists the kind of clear categorization that jewels and letters allow. Objects, personal ones, items that carry meaning not because of their material value or their historical significance in any formal sense, but because of what they meant to the Queen herself. Things she had kept close throughout her life for reasons that were entirely private. Things that a woman accumulates over 9 decades of living that represent moments and relationships and private anchors that the outside world never gets to see. She chose to pass those anchors to Catherine. That choice is perhaps the most intimate dimension of the entire collection. Because you do not leave your private anchors to someone you merely respect. You do not pass forward the objects that have held personal meaning throughout your own life to someone whose place in your world is primarily institutional or ceremonial. You leave those things to someone you have genuinely admitted to the interior of your life, someone whose presence there has become real enough and trusted enough that giving them access to the most personal dimension of what you leave behind feels not like a risk, but like the only thing that makes sense. Elizabeth was precise about everything. She was precise about this. Every item in that reserved collection was there because she had decided it belonged there, because she had considered what it meant and who it was for, and why that person specifically was the right custodian for it. The jewels carry her history forward in Catherine's hands. The letters carry her voice into a future she would not be present to see. And the personal objects carry something harder to name, but more intimate than either. They carry the private self that Queen Elizabeth protected from the world for 96 years. She trusted it to one person. The question of why that person was Catherine and not anyone else in the constellation of people who surrounded the Queen during her long reign is the question at the heart of everything. And the answer to it begins not with titles or protocol or institutional position. It begins with a relationship that most people never saw clearly.
The Queen actually didn't meet Kate until sort of 8 or 9 years into her courtship with...
Why Catherine and nobody else? The relationship between Queen Elizabeth and Catherine Middleton did not begin warmly. That is not a controversial claim. It is simply an accurate one. And understanding it honestly is the only way to appreciate the full significance of what the Queen eventually did for the woman her grandson married. When Catherine first entered the royal orbit seriously, she was not arriving into a family that had a clear template for what she represented. The monarchy had seen plenty of outsiders attempt to navigate its demands over the decades. It had watched some of them succeed and watched others fail in ways that were painful and public and deeply damaging to the institution. By the time Catherine arrived, the family had fresh and considerable evidence of what happened when the wrong person entered the circle and found themselves unable to bear what it asked of them.
So that together we can build a happier, healthier, more nurturing society.
The Queen was watching carefully, not with hostility, not with the kind of deliberate coldness that would have made her position toward Catherine easy to read and easy to report, but with the particular quality of patient, unhurried assessment that defined how Elizabeth approached everything she considered important. She was not going to be rushed into a judgment. She was not going to extend warmth before it had been earned, or withhold it after it had been. She was going to watch, and Catherine, to her considerable credit, seemed to understand that instinctively. What she did not do in those early years is as significant as what she did. She did not attempt to accelerate the relationship. She did not make obvious gestures designed to signal her suitability or perform the kind of visible eagerness to belong that the Queen would have found transparent and off-putting. She did not try to be Diana. She did not try to be anyone other than herself, which in those circumstances required a level of self-possession that people who have never been in that situation tend to underestimate significantly. She was simply present, consistent, grounded, unremarkable in the best possible sense of that word. And the Queen noticed. The first real shift in the relationship came not through any dramatic moment of connection, but through the accumulation of smaller ones. Occasions where Catherine was placed in situations that tested her composure and responded with an equanimity that told the Queen something important. Family gatherings where the dynamics were complicated and the pressure was real, and Catherine navigated both without giving anyone anything to worry about. Those moments built something, slowly, quietly, in the way that trust always builds between people who are both, in their different ways, constitutionally disinclined to rush it. The Queen began to see something in Catherine that she recognized, not because Catherine was like her in the obvious biographical sense. Their backgrounds were entirely different. Their paths to the royal world had nothing in common. The circumstances they had each navigated to arrive at their respective positions bore no structural resemblance to each other. But there was a quality, a particular kind of inner steadiness, the capacity to absorb pressure without allowing it to distort your sense of who you are or what you are there for. The ability to exist inside an institution that makes enormous demands, and to meet those demands without losing the personal self that exists beneath the official role. Elizabeth had spent her entire life cultivating that quality in herself. She recognized it in Catherine because she knew exactly what it looked like from the inside. That recognition changed things. It changed the texture of how the Queen engaged with her grandson's wife in private settings. The conversations became less formal, less bounded by the careful protocols that govern interaction between a monarch and a junior member of the royal family, more direct, more personal, more like the exchanges between two women who had found, across the considerable distance of age and experience and official position, a genuine point of contact. People who observed them together during this period have described something that surprised them. The Queen laughed with Catherine, not the polite public smile that Elizabeth deployed with practiced precision across 7 decades of official engagements. The real thing, the unguarded, spontaneous laughter of someone who has been genuinely amused by a person they genuinely enjoy being around.
Whether it was for tea, whether it was for a chat, and it always was, and Kate became incredibly close to the Queen.
That sounds like a small detail. It is not a small detail at all, because the Queen's genuine laughter was not something she distributed widely. It was not a social tool she used to put people at ease or signal approval in the carefully managed way that monarchs sometimes deploy visible warmth. It happened when it happened, with the people it happened with, and it could not be manufactured or performed by someone trying to earn it through effort. Catherine earned it by simply being who she was. The years that followed William and Catherine's marriage deepened the relationship further. The birth of the children accelerated it in a specific way that went beyond the obvious dynastic significance of George, Charlotte, and Louis representing the direct continuation of the Windsor line. Elizabeth had watched her own children navigate parenthood with varying degrees of success. She had seen the ways in which the pressure of royal life could distort the family relationships at its center. She had seen what happened when those relationships were not tended carefully.
The Queen had a lot of time with her great-grandchildren. The Queen would host this wonderful sleepover at Balmoral in August and invite all of the grandchildren.
Catherine tended them carefully. The Queen watched her do it, watched her build a family life that had genuine warmth and genuine stability at its core, watched her protect her children from the worst of what royal exposure could do to young people while simultaneously preparing them, gradually and thoughtfully, for the world they had been born into. She saw herself in some of that. The same instinct to protect, the same understanding that the children at the center of the dynasty needed a home before they needed a platform. By the time the Queen began assembling what she would reserve for Catherine, the relationship between them had become something that neither the official record nor the public narrative had ever fully captured. It had become real, not institutional, not ceremonial, not the carefully managed warmth of two women fulfilling their respective roles in the same family performance. Real in the way that matters most. Real in the way that makes you want to leave someone something of yourself when you go.
She was really thrilled that it was a little girl, and I think as soon as we came back here to Kensington, she was one of our first visitors here.
When Catherine found out, there are moments that divide a life into before and after. Not the dramatic ones necessarily, not the moments that arrive with noise and witnesses and the kind of visible significance that makes them easy to identify as turning points in retrospect. Sometimes the moments that change everything are the quiet ones, the ones that happen in a private room with no audience and no ceremony, and nothing to mark them as extraordinary except the weight of what is being understood in real time. Catherine's discovery of what the Queen had reserved for her was one of those moments. The circumstances surrounding it were deliberately private. That was entirely consistent with how the Queen had constructed the arrangement from the beginning. She had not set this aside through institutional channels or official processes precisely because she did not want the moment of discovery to be an institutional one. She did not want lawyers present. She did not want palace officials overseeing the handover with the careful professional detachment that accompanies the formal transfer of significant royal assets. She wanted Catherine to find it as a person, not as a princess, not as the future Queen of England, not as the recipient of a bequest being administered according to the terms of a legal document, but as a woman receiving something personal from another woman who had chosen her specifically and deliberately, and with the full weight of considered intention behind the choice. The people who were present in the immediate aftermath have described Catherine as visibly moved. That observation requires a moment of context. Catherine is not someone who displays emotion carelessly in settings where it might be observed by others. She has the same quality of public composure that defined the Queen she admired, the ability to process significant things internally while maintaining the external steadiness that royal life demands. People who have watched her navigate some of the most testing moments of her public life have noted consistently that she does not reach for visible emotional expression as a first response to things that affect her deeply, which is why the accounts of her visible emotion at this moment carry the weight they do. What she encountered when she opened what the Queen had left was not simply a collection of objects and documents, it was a conversation. A one-sided one necessarily, given that the woman who had initiated it was no longer present to continue it, but a conversation nonetheless, constructed with the same precision and intentionality that Elizabeth brought to everything she considered important. The jewels she found first, and the accounts of her reaction to those pieces describe not the response of someone encountering objects of financial or historical significance, but the response of someone who understood immediately what each piece meant, why it had been chosen, what the Queen was communicating through the selection of that specific item rather than any other. That level of immediate comprehension tells you something important. It tells you that Catherine already knew enough about Elizabeth's private language of objects and meaning to read what she was being shown without needing anyone to explain it to her, that she had been close enough to the woman, in the private rather than the official sense, to understand the grammar of how she communicated the things she could not say out loud. That kind of comprehension does not come from a formal relationship. It comes from years of genuine closeness. The letters affected her differently. Several people with knowledge of what happened in that private room have described a stillness that came over Catherine when she encountered the written words the Queen had left for her. Not the emotional response of someone overwhelmed, something quieter than that, the stillness of someone absorbing something significant with the full attention it deserves. She read them privately. Their contents remain private, and that privacy is itself a form of communication from the woman who wrote them. Elizabeth understood that some things lose their meaning the moment they become public. that the most honest and personal things said between two people derive part of their power from the fact that they exist only for the people they are meant for. She had constructed this entire reserved collection around that understanding. The letters were its purest expression. What Catherine did in the hours and days that followed the discovery reveals something about how deeply the experience affected her. She did not reach immediately for the mechanisms of response that royal life makes available. She did not convene meetings or consult advisors or initiate the kind of institutional processing that significant royal events typically trigger. She sat with it. She gave herself the time to absorb what she had been given and what it meant before she did anything else with that understanding. That response is entirely consistent with who Catherine is. She has always been someone who processes things at depth rather than at speed, who gives significant experiences the interior space they require before translating them into action. It is one of the qualities that the Queen had recognized in her and valued, the capacity to be still with something important instead of immediately converting it into forward momentum. William knew not the specific contents of every item in the reserved collection. Some of what was left for Catherine was left for her specifically, and the privacy of that belonged to her alone. But he knew that something had been set aside. He had known before his grandmother died, and the accounts of how he held space for Catherine during the discovery and its aftermath describe a man who understood the magnitude of what his wife was experiencing and had the emotional intelligence to let her experience it fully without trying to manage or redirect it. That capacity in William is itself something the Queen had observed and approved of quietly. She had watched him learn how to love Catherine in the way Catherine needed to be loved. She had considered it one of the things about him that confirmed her confidence in the future he and Catherine would build together. The discovery changed something in Catherine.
We are. We're like sort of ducks. It's sort of very calm on the surface, but little feet going under the water. But no, it's been really exciting. We've been talking about it for a long time, so for us it's kind of...
Not dramatically, not in the visible, externally obvious way that transformative experiences are sometimes described, but in the way of something settling, something that had always been present in her relationship with the institution, and her sense of her own place within it, finding a new and permanent anchor. She had known, in the way that intelligent people in her position come to know things through observation and experience, that the Queen had trusted her. Now she knew it in a different way. She had it in writing, she had it in objects chosen with her specifically in mind. She had it in the most personal gesture available to a woman who expressed her deepest feelings not through words spoken aloud, but through the irreversible, permanent language of what she chose to leave behind. The Queen was gone, but in that private room, surrounded by what had been reserved for her alone, Catherine felt her presence more completely than she had felt it at any public occasion during the years of her reign. That is what the Queen had intended, and it had worked exactly as she planned. What this inheritance signals to the crown. Private gestures have public consequences. That is the paradox sitting at the heart of everything Queen Elizabeth did when she reserved that collection for Catherine. She constructed it as an intensely personal act. She protected it from institutional processes deliberately. She ensured its privacy with the same precision she brought to everything she considered truly important. And yet, the implications of what she did ripple outward far beyond the private room where Catherine discovered it, far beyond the intimate relationship between two women that produced it, far beyond even the immediate royal family, whose internal dynamics it has quietly but unmistakably rearranged. It reaches into the future of the monarchy itself. That reach was not accidental. Queen Elizabeth understood better than anyone alive that private acts at the level of the crown are never entirely private, that the decisions a monarch makes about who she trusts and what she leaves them and how she constructs her own legacy do not stay contained within the personal relationships they appear to inhabit. They send signals, they establish precedents, they communicate to the institution and to everyone watching it something about where genuine authority is expected to rest in the years and decades that follow. The reserve collection communicated something very specific. It said that the woman the Queen trusted most completely with the interior of the monarchy, with its most personal history and its most private anchors, was not a figure from the older generation of royals whose positions were already established and whose relationships with the institution were already defined. It was the woman who represents its future, the woman who will one day be queen not as a consort, but as the sovereign partner of a king whose reign the entire institution is currently orienting itself around. That signal does not fade with time, it compounds. Every decision Catherine makes going forward, every act of institutional stewardship, and every exercise of the judgment the Queen trusted her with, will be made from a foundation that includes what was left for her in that reserved collection. Not just the material items, not just the jewels and the letters and the personal objects whose significance is known only to her, but the authority those things represent, the explicit, permanent, deeply personal endorsement of a woman whose judgment about people was tested across 96 years of extraordinary experience and never found to be careless. Catherine carries that endorsement now. It is not visible in the way that titles and official positions are visible. It does not appear on any formal document or ceremonial program, but it is present in everything she does and in the way the institution around her has begun to organize itself in relation to her growing authority. The people inside the palace who understand what was reserved and why have adjusted their understanding of the hierarchy accordingly, not because they were told to, not because any official announcement was made or any formal repositioning of Catherine's role was communicated through institutional channels, but because people who work at the center of power develop a very finely calibrated sense for where genuine authority resides. And genuine authority in the post-Elizabeth monarchy has a new and unmistakable center of gravity.
Obviously, she's not me around to share any of the fun and excitement of it all. This was my way of keeping...
It sits with William and Catherine together, but the reserved collection has added a dimension to Catherine's individual authority that is worth understanding separately from her position as William's partner. Because what the Queen left her was not left to them as a couple. It was left to her, specifically, personally, with an intentionality that distinguished Catherine as an individual from every other person in the royal world. That distinction matters institutionally in ways that will become increasingly apparent as the years pass. The monarchy Catherine will eventually help lead is not going to be the same institution that Elizabeth spent 70 years stewarding. The world it operates in is different. The demands placed on it are different. The relationship between the crown and the public it serves has shifted in ways that require a different kind of royal presence than the one that defined the previous reign. Elizabeth knew that. She had watched the institution struggle, at times, to find the register that the modern world required of it. She had seen where the old models worked and where they had begun to fail. She had thought carefully, in her final years, about what the monarchy needed to carry it through the challenges ahead. And she had concluded that what it needed most was a woman at its center who combined genuine personal warmth with institutional seriousness, who could connect with the public in the human, unguarded way that the modern world demanded without sacrificing the dignity and the depth that the crown required, who understood both the personal and the institutional dimensions of the role with equal clarity and equal commitment. She found that woman. She watched her develop over 2 decades of proximity and testing and quiet, consistent demonstration of exactly the qualities the institution needed. And then she did what she always did when she arrived at a conclusion she was certain of. She acted on it, permanently, personally, in a way that could not be undone or redirected or diminished by anything that followed.
Address the growing rate of poor mental health, thrive as individuals, and build a happier, healthier, more nurturing society.
The reserved collection is the Queen's final act of institutional architecture, dressed in the language of personal love, but built with the structural intention of a woman who was always, even in her most private moments, thinking about the future of what she had given her life to protect. Catherine has the collection now. She has the jewels that carry Elizabeth's history forward. She has the letters that carry her voice. She has the personal objects that carry the private self the Queen protected from the world for nearly a century. And she has something that cannot be itemized or cataloged or assessed by any process the institution has available to it. She has the Queen's certainty about who she is and what she is capable of. That is the most significant thing in the vault, and it will outlast everything else inside it. Queen Elizabeth did not leave Catherine a collection. She left her a confirmation that she saw her, that she trusted her, that the future of the monarchy was safe in her hands. The most powerful woman in British history made her final choice quietly and personally.